Okay, so I'm delighted to be joined by former Peterborough United winger and former academy coach as well, Ryan Semple. Well, Ryan, first and foremost, before we actually get on to your Peterborough career in terms of first team, you had a spell at Man United on trial, like so many others around that sort of time.
Yeah.
I think it was about 2002. What can you remember about how that came about, and how much did you enjoy it?
Yeah, so it was a great time, amazing time. We obviously spoke to a couple of the other lads. Jamie actually went after me. So what happened was really we came back one pre-season. I think it was I'd spent a year in the youth team, and then we come back for the second year, and Baz pulled us into the office. It was me, Mark Coulson, and Adam Fry, and just said that I think a few players had got injured at United, and they were looking for some obviously players to go and help out, and what an experience it would be if obviously they asked the question if we could go over there. So we went initially. The three of us went to the Milk Cup, played in the tournament over there, which was amazing, fantastic. We got beat in the semi-finals off. I think it might have been Panathinaikos actually from Greece, and then we done pretty well. I managed to score a few goals, and then the following probably 3-4 weeks later, after we'd returned back to Peterborough, they asked me to go again, and we had a tournament in Portugal, and it was ourselves, Porto, Real Madrid, and I can't remember the other team. It's escaped me, but again, like amazing time, amazing experience. And then sort of that, it was the start of the season at that point then. So we'd returned. I'd signed, been offered a professional contract by that point and signed that at 17. And then I ended up going again towards the end of that season, and just training for a couple of weeks. And really enjoyed it. Amazing experience.
Pasty said in his interview there was obviously quite a number of players that went on to have successful careers in the game. Did it feel a little bit surreal to know that you could end up playing with someone who'd go on and play at the highest level? Because when you're looking around a dressing room, particularly, I suppose the good thing from your point of view is you didn't go alone the first time. Yeah. It would have been a bit daunting at that point, but we sort of looking around and thinking, wow, what's going on here?
Yeah, massively. There was so in that dressing room you had Kieran Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
Kieran, who obviously went on to play numerous games for the first team, and probably never hit the heights that people expected of him, although he did play for England and scored for England and stuff. Chris Eagles was one that again had a decent career and probably faded a little bit sooner than people thought. Phil Bardsley, Tom Heaton. Obviously, it helped as well, going back to what you said about going with others. Obviously, Steely was there, and Steely had been there not a full year, I don't think, but he'd been there a little bit, and obviously knew people. And I stayed with him, and Sylvan Ebanks Blake, where he lived in the same digs as us. Johnny Evans was in the digs as well, but a couple of years younger, so he was coming back and forth. But no, it's at the time you're all just young lads wanting to play football, and it was a fantastic experience and environment. But as you go on and you can't help but follow their careers, it's great to see.
And you made your first team debut for Posh. I think you were 17. I think it was in a game against Bristol City.
Bristol City.
Yeah. What can you remember about that experience? Was it a case of? I mean, I've said this to a number of people that Baz didn't really overcomplicate things in terms of advice. It was go on and enjoy it, I'd imagine. Does that allow you to go and express yourself?
Yeah, 100%. So I remember we'd had a youth cup game. In fact, I'd been on the bench the week before, a couple of weeks before, mm-hmm. against Midfield, and we drew 0-0. I didn't get on. I was gutted that I didn't come on and play. And then we had a FA Youth Cup game in the week, and we played like a non-league team, Cradley Town it was, and we battered them. We beat them like 8-1, I think it was, and I'd scored 4 goals. And I remember after the game, like straight after the game, in the dressing room, Baz come in and said, "Well done to everyone." And I remember him saying, you'll be with us. You'll be with us at the weekend. I didn't really think anything of it. And then obviously come back into training, and I was training with the first team. And I remember it was on the Friday, and he just sort of said, "Look, you'll be starting tomorrow." And it was then I was like, wow. Obviously, I knew I'd been on the bench and I'd trained with the first team and stuff, as a number of us had. But yeah, that feeling of you're going to obviously definitely be starting and playing, it was exciting. I was obviously a little bit nervous, but very exciting. I actually remember, you probably don't remember, I remember doing an interview with you a couple of days before, and I remember talking, you were asking how I felt and speaking about Bristol City, and I remember you mentioned the player Scott Murray, and just so naive, and obviously I was 17, I didn't have a clue about any of their players. I didn't know what, like you said about with Baz, it was very simple, so he didn't go into any detail about them or anything like that. And when I think back, it's just crazy, the naivety, but I think that helped because I didn't have any fear and just go out and play and go out and enjoy it. And the players around that time as well, some really experienced players in there, obviously Jason Lee, Jimmy Bullard, Andy Clark. There's a number of players, so much experience that you just felt comfortable that, well, you're just going to go and play and you're in the team for a reason. So no, it was, we got beat 3-1, which was frustrating, but no, the experience was amazing.
It's always interesting when you talk to people who make their debut and what position that they're in and how you can affect the game. Because obviously, if you're a goalkeeper and you make your debut, one mistake and that kills everything. Yeah. If you're playing in the back line, you can sort of be helped through, I guess, by senior pros around you. As a winger, you're expected to get at the fullback, get past the fullback, get crosses in, and sort of affect the game. Is that something that I guess you learn to live with, that kind of pressure, that when people give you the ball, they're expecting something to happen? Did you feel that sort of nerves when you had that first couple of runs at the fullback?
Do you know what? I didn't, and that will go down to Barry. And you go back to what you said then about different positions. For me, if you're a goalkeeper, a mistake's a goal. A defender, often it will lead to a chance for a goal. With a winger and a forward, I think you can be more braver and not worry so much, because obviously you've got so much more of the pitch and space behind you and people to back you up. And I never felt, that's one thing I always, probably my biggest strength as a player, was that I always had belief and I wanted to go and take people on. And sometimes I think that was maybe a little bit of a downfall, that I could have kept things more simpler at times or whatever. But no, 100%. I just used to love receiving the ball, and I always used to feel, whether I'd come on and a lot of my games were coming on as well as starts, I always felt that people wanted me to do that, and I'd always get a sense of the crowd. Obviously playing wide as well, you're closer to the crowd. I always got a sense that's what they wanted me to do, and I knew that that's what Barry wanted me to do, or the other managers as well, a little bit later, but certainly with Barry. So I never felt that pressure. I just wanted to obviously do it and try and do it well.
Yeah, you weren't really helped at the time because the pitch was appalling, wasn't it? Yeah. And I guess as a winger as well, when you have no real belief that the ball's going to run true when you're running with it, that must get into your head a little bit, and you just think, right, I have to watch every kind of step that I make here. Was that? I mean, I don't want to say that players probably look forward to playing away, but the pitches were inevitably a little bit better than London Road at that time.
Yeah, particularly, funnily enough, the dugout side was better than the obviously the newer stand. The other side, because obviously the size of the stand and what have you, and you see it now, the pitch is fantastic. But yeah, it was always one of them. At times you'd have to take another touch and make sure that you didn't completely shank it or air shot it. But no, it was just one of those things. You learn to live with it, and pitches have come on so much now. It is fantastic, even at the lower levels. So it's not much a problem anymore.
You mentioned the early sort of players you were playing with, people like Jason Lee, who had a wealth of experience. Did those sort of players help you through in those early few months or so in terms of talking to you and making sure that you were dealing with it? Because, when players come through an academy system, however young they are, making that transition can make or break you in those early few months.
Yeah, no, they were all excellent. And in fairness, I think because we had a good youth team, and there was players that would come and train with the first team quite a lot, and they'd always look after you. There were some big characters in there. You say Jason, Simon Ray, another one, Dean Hooper right at the start, another a big character. There were loads, and there was never a case of, and back then it was a lot more. Obviously, you did jobs, and I used to really enjoy going back to the ground and doing jobs, and obviously clean boots and stuff. But I never felt, and again, it's probably from Barry, to be fair, and the other coaches, you never felt that there was a case of anyone bullying you or anything. Not at all. It was always lots of camaraderie. You obviously had as well. Tars had come through the youth setup. Matthew Gill, Gareth Jellyman. There was a number of players that had come through, so they looked after you as well, because you were going through what they'd been through previously. So no, it was brilliant. It was fantastic.
Unfortunately, you're once you broke into the side, then you obviously broke your leg, didn't you? In terms of really setting you back, because particularly, I guess, given the fact that, as you say, you come through the academy, you were starting to make a little bit of an impact, and then to have that curtailed, I guess at that age must have been probably tougher than if you were just to sustain it later on in your career, because you feel like you're wasting an opportunity. Was that hard to come back and do that rehab?
Yeah, it was. You've obviously, if you do it a little bit later, you're a little bit more, you're more experienced, but you've proved yourself as well, and you prove what you can do to people and what have you. And yeah, I always retained the belief that I could go and be successful, but it was so it was around the March time, I think, of this my breakthrough season, if you like. I was still 17, and I think what it did, it just, like you said there, it stunted a little bit of the speed of the progress, and then you have to obviously get back fit, and then it's not just about being fit. You've then got to obviously become match sharp, and then you've got to try and get back in the first team. And obviously, because we was young, and then what happened during that period as well, the academy system got scrapped, so I didn't have the opportunity to maybe have another year, or certainly spending more time in the reserves and stuff like that. It just didn't. Yeah, it wasn't ideal, but at the same time, I did come back fit from it, and I did obviously continue to play games for the first team. But yeah, no, it's obviously never ideal to get an injury like that. But at that time, I think even if it had been maybe a year later, it might have not been as impactful.
How did you do it? Did you actually do it in a game? I can't remember how you broke your leg.
It was a youth team game. We played Wickham away, and it was right at the end of the season. And it wasn't even a bad tackle. I'd knocked the ball to take someone on, and he sort of caught me with his back leg, his trailing leg, and yeah, it was painful. But again, I didn't really think that I'd broke my leg, because I travelled back with the team on the not even on the coach, on the minibus, travelled back with the team, and it was painful. And I remember the physio, Pete Cord, at the time said, look, just go and get it checked out. And so I went to hospital, not thinking thought maybe it was going to be a bit of badly bruising, but yeah, fractured in 2 places. So yeah, wasn't ideal at all.
No, obviously when you had a loan spell, I think at Farnborough, didn't you, in terms of trying to get fully match fit, as you said there.
Yeah.
You then sort of came back to a sort of completely different club, really, didn't it? In terms of how the season was progressing, was under different management. Was that hard?
The time at Farnborough was great. I loved the loan spell there. I played about 10 games over a Christmas period, and it was brilliant, because that was my first consistent exposure to men's football, and it was tough, obviously, in the conference then as well. It was brutal at times. I remember my first game, I got smashed at the far post from a corner, big black eye, away at Halifax. So I loved that, and that did help me. But as you say, sort of the change in management and coaching staff, and I always sort of, now as a coach, I reflect and think about how dealing with young players and what young players need. And even at that age, 18, 19, 20, you are still so young. And I think that probably didn't help at all in terms of having someone consistent that would still treat you as what you are, a very young player that needs coaching and needs guiding and needs pulling up on things that they're not doing well. Obviously working hard on things you do well as well. And that never really happened because, as you say, things were changing quite a lot and you were almost thrown into the first team environment. And it was a good environment, but it was a man's environment and we weren't men. We were still sort of boys, if you want, if you like. So that was difficult, yeah.
Is that why when you I mean, we talk about Big Ron in a second, but in terms of the dressing room, at that time, I'd imagine it was very easy for little pockets or clusters, I suppose is the word nowadays, to form in terms of you would necessarily go with people of your own age because, as you say, it was a different kind of environment. So you'd be with Sean, you'd be with Crowie and Pasty because you are of a similar age and you probably had a similar journey, whereas other people might be different. Was that how it felt at times, that it was a little bit young and old or young and southern and whatever it may be?
I think what it was, there was no major issues, I didn't think, between players or whether it being young and old or anything like that. But I think it's so important that you, as a manager, coach, whatever, it's so important to get as much as possible while you're going to have separate friendships. There's that, it's the common goal and the common objective. Everybody needs to know what that is and everybody needs to know what they're contributing to that. And I think at times it was, there were things that maybe looking back didn't help. And you say you're gonna talk about Big Ron briefly, but yeah, I think ultimately you want you want the optimum environment to be able to be successful, and that has to take into account young players that are coming through and need more guidance. That needs to take into account senior pros who are maybe coming towards the end of their career and because of that need things to happen quicker and maybe a little bit more selfish in a way of, no, we need to achieve this now. We haven't got time to wait. And you've got players that are in between that as well. So no, I'd spent a lot of time with the younger players and some of them I'd known since I was 8 or 9 years old. Some of them obviously a little bit less than that. But yeah, it's natural that you're going to spend time with different boys.
It was interesting with Big Ron, and I've spoken to a number of players that were obviously involved in the process of that. And some players were desperate to avoid the cameras. Some players didn't really have a problem with the cameras. I think you fell a little bit into the second category in a sense that you were interviewed quite a lot, and that may be down to the fact that you're quite good at them. But you didn't look as if you were overawed by the cameras. In fact, the portrayal of you was more a maturity of someone so young. Is that sort of how you tried to go into it? Because it would have been difficult, I'd imagine, trying to deal with, being trying to break into the first team on a consistent basis, but also everything that was going on around it as well.
Yeah, going back to your other interview, so I know you spoke to Dean about it, and it was really interesting listening to him because he was seeing it in a completely different light to myself, or obviously Jamie's interview as well, because actually, I think going back to being young and maybe a bit naive to it, I had no issue. I had no real issue with the cameras. I think it's amazing when you speak to people after, obviously it's the show, and people's like, was that staged or was anything? Were you told to do certain things? And the answer was no. It was what it was, which was probably why it was so successful. I didn't mind it. And maybe it was because I know I'm a good lad, and I know I am what I am, and I'm not ashamed of that. So I was never going to behave in a way that, well, I don't think portrayed me in a bad way, because that's just not how I behave. And yeah, maybe it was just because I was young, but I didn't mind it at all. And I think it was probably only towards the end and looking back now that you think, yeah, actually there were some things, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but there were some things that maybe did contribute negatively. to the whole situation. But as other people have spoke about, it was what was needed to be done to provide finance for the club. So ultimately, we did just have to get on with it, and yeah, that was the way it was.
I have to ask, in terms of anyone that appeared in the show, what their reaction was when Bleo quit, because as I said in previous interviews, I was in contact with Bleo throughout that day. I was shocked that he had walked out in the manner that he had done, and obviously everything surrounding that game as well against Macclesfield, because it was a must-win game and it ended up being a dramatic game. When you were involved in that, was it a little bit would you just describe it as strange? Because looking back, obviously cameras focus on different people's reactions, and certain people are smiling, certain people are shocked, certain people just like Gainey wanting to know whether he can go in the hole or not. I mean, where were you in the dressing room at that time?
So I wasn't in the dressing room either. So I'd been injured, and I weren't playing that game. So I'd actually been at the training ground doing some work, and I got back late. Stayed doing a little bit extra, and I got back at probably it had all happened basically, and the players were out for the warm up and what have you. And I got back, and I just thought, I'm a little bit late here, so I went and just sat to go and watch the game. And obviously Bleo weren't there, and Baz was on the sideline. I'm thinking, what has gone off here? And then obviously, as everybody knows, what happened afterwards. And looking back, so when Big Ron came out, I'd heard what had happened, but I couldn't wait to see what actually happened. And it's crazy. It was crazy. And the thing is as well, because Peterborough was the only club I'd been at to that point, you do think, and obviously the whole Big Ron thing, part of you thinks, well, this is just normal. This is a football club. And it's only when you go to other places, or you obviously speak to people that have been at other clubs, and you hear different things, and you think, well, actually, no, that isn't the normal at all. But it was it was a crazy experience. But nobody, I think, would ever have imagined, obviously, how successful the show was. And people, I get asked about it every single place I go in terms of a new job or what have you. People have always sort of heard of it and laugh about it. But
I mean, a Big Ron, obviously, I spoke to Crowe about it, and he actually really, really enjoyed working with Big Ron in terms of the advice he gave. And I guess as a young player, it would be foolish not to sort of open your ears to see what advice he had, because whether you take it on or not is irrelevant, but you want to listen to someone who'd managed at that level. Did you feel it was a beneficial, if you take the show away from it, by having someone of his standing in and around the club? Did that help?
Yeah, of course it did. You just hit the nail on the head. You'd be silly not to take something from it and his experience. And I used to talk. He had some unbelievable stories, as you can imagine. And he used to talk about, because I obviously played wide and liked to beat people and what have you. He used to talk about Laurie Cunningham a lot to me. And I, at that point, had no idea who Laurie Cunningham was. And obviously so successful at West Brom. He obviously tragically died early. Played for Man United, went out, played in Spain, had obviously a real successful time out there. And just listening to obviously the things that Ron had done, and the players that he'd worked with, obviously Brian Robson and Cyril Reid, the list goes on. So it was a really good experience, and from that point of view, for sure. And I just think the situation he was put in as well, obviously, because he's part of the show. So he was trying to do his bit and help individuals out, and obviously help Bleo as well. And the show didn't always see it in that light, but there was good intentions from him. No question.
I think you scored against Stockport in that year, and I think that was the game where you did a ridiculously stupid dance celebration, if memory serves me correct. You scored 3 goals in your time, I think, at Posh. Was a celebration, or was something you worked on in training?
Well, there you go. The silly celebration was because I was just so excited that I'd scored. 3 goals is a terrible return for a winger. Just something that frustrated me as well. I should have definitely scored more goals. But no, that particular celebration, I remember that was down to Gainey, that one. We'd obviously had a mess around in training and, come up with that ridiculous celebration. But that is something that seems to always get mentioned as well. Not the goal itself, because it was a pretty good goal, I thought. But, I always get hammered for the celebration.
Before we talk about individual players, just in terms of when you left Peterborough, obviously you went to Lincoln, but in terms of how that move came about, was it a case of, because it's always interesting when people leave the club, because it could be for several reasons. It could be a new challenge, it could be not wanted, it could be, the fact that they offered more money. Was it an opportunity for you to try and make a career away from Peterborough? Is that how you viewed it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. From my point of view, I'd played that season, probably a big proportion, I don't know the exact proportion, but I played a lot more in that year than I had previously. And obviously Mark Wright to start with that season, then obviously Bleo, and Keith came in. Obviously Keith Alexander came in, and it was pretty evident quite early that the style of play he wanted to play I felt gonna feature as much as I didn't want to just play as many games as previous. I certainly didn't want to play any less. I wanted to play more. So that was obviously in my mind, and I'd sort of expressed the desire, if obviously the opportunity came, if I wasn't going to play here, that I would like to go elsewhere. And Lincoln came in, and Lincoln were the first club that came in. And obviously the deal happened with Simon Yeo that was going on in the background as well, and him coming my way. And I think, again, probably a little bit of lack of experience and naivety. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go. They were obviously interested in Simon Yeo as well, and I thought this is the opportunity. They had John Dean, who was the director of football, who was obviously experienced, and he was at Hampton the season before, and I played quite well against them in a couple of the games. And he'd gone to Lincoln, and John Schofield was he was the youth team manager previously, who got the job when Keith left and came to Peterborough. And so he was a young player, young coach, worked with young players. So I thought, great. So I went without really doing much, probably looking into and digging into different things. I just went for it, and it didn't go well at all. I didn't start off well there. I picked up a little bit of an injury, and it sort of just went from bad to worse there, really. And it's one of those things. It was frustrating. If in hindsight, obviously Keith didn't last long at Peterborough, and obviously Darren came in, and you never know what would happen. I know for a fact I would have, if I hadn't have played, I would have certainly improved as a player in terms of from coaching and training every day and things like that. There's no doubt I would have improved under Darren. But at the same time, I might have gone 6 months and not played at all, and then I would be in an even worse position. So it's one of those, you make your decisions, and you obviously you stick with them and see how it plays out.
In terms of the players you obviously played with, you played with a whole variety of different players, but it's quite interesting that obviously having spoken to Jamie, and you made sort of similar paths, and both were stunted a little bit by injuries. If you look back on the careers of both of you, and you both played on the wing, and you both sampled life at Manchester United, and you've both gone into coaching in different kind of routes. When I spoke to Pasty, obviously he went through a really serious injury, and an injury that could have and has still affected his life. And I know you were good close friends with him, and as a teammate as well. And he said that obviously friends and family really got him through those points. Do you feel that there were similarities between the two of you, and not just because he came through the academy?
Yeah, certainly. I think Pasty obviously he had a better career than me, and if he'd have stayed fit, he would have had an even better career than what he obviously did, and certainly a longer one. But there were similarities, and I think that we obviously have a tight friendship group, and he's within that for sure. And some of my best friends are from the Peterborough days. 100%. I still am very close to a number of the players, and that does help. And I'm obviously fortunate to have within the area a lot of family, and they support you as they would support any one of us. But yeah, that helps a hell of a lot. And I think what you have to do is you understand, and this is something from coaching and that I try and talk to all players about, the resilience. You have to be so resilient in football to take the knocks, to take the lows, whether you're not in the team or whether you're injured or a manager changes and all of a sudden your previous manager loves you and the next one doesn't. You do have to be so thick-skinned, and obviously the higher you go, whether it's fans nowadays with social media, people always have an opinion, and you do have to be so tough. And injuries is just part of that. But I also look back and think how privileged I was as well. Privileged that first and foremost I got to be a professional footballer and have a small and not necessarily the level I wanted to get, but I had a professional career in some way, which was amazing. Obviously I went and played non-league, but also the people you meet and the friendships and the changing room and that the environment it's amazing, and it does shape. There's so many things that growing up, whether I was a young player but also in and around the first team as well, so many things that shape you as a person and instill values in you, not just for football but for life as well. So no, it's all in all a positive, massive positive experience.
Now you're coaching. You're actually coaching at Manchester City. You obviously coach within the Peterborough Academy as well. I know you had the wonderfully named Semple Soccer for a period of time as well. That must have come up with marketing teams look at you and think, God,
creative.
Yeah, exactly. But you actually started that journey quite early, and going into that. Was that because it was something you always wanted to do? Were you you went into it because you learned different things and thought you wanted to implement it yourself? I mean, it was quite a journey you started at a young age, and obviously it's took you quite high up very, very quickly in terms of the age you are now.
Yeah, no, to be honest, Phil, if you'd have said to me maybe less than a year before that I was going to go into coaching and start Semple Soccer and what have you, I probably would have laughed and disagreed, because it came about. I left Lincoln early, so I left Lincoln in the January, and I had until the end of the season, so my contract got cancelled early, and I played non-league a little bit, and I decided to try and get back in, and I went on a trial at Exeter and a couple of other places. But it got to the point, the start of the following pre-season, where I was thinking, well, I'm either going to keep trying and going on trials and keep pushing and keep trying to make a career. And I was 22 at the time. And I could have done that 100%. And there's so many players that have gone that route and gone and been really successful. But I decided, while still playing, I went and actually played for Deepin for a season, which was, again, an amazing experience, because I loved the people there, and I played every week and scored loads of goals. And it was so much fun. But I decided that I was going to actually, get involved in coaching a little bit off the cuff, really. And I started with a holiday camp. Just put flyers. I used to go around. I got some flyers printed and go around and stick them on car windows. I actually got told off for doing it at Tesco's Hampton once, just going and sticking the flyers on, and I just started from there, and had no real idea about coaching. I just knew that what things I enjoyed, and I knew I wanted to somehow try and give back a little bit. And then Dave Robertson was the academy manager at Peterborough, who was a coach when I was in the academy, and just said he'd heard about me doing a little bit of coaching in schools. Did I want to come and get involved? And I did. And for the rest of that season, I was voluntary and part-time. And I was part-time for a number of years at the club, and still playing part-time as well. I was playing at Boston and Gainsborough and a few other clubs as well. And it just went from there. It just literally went from there. And I was working with the under-11s, and then sort of worked my way up the age groups, and then obviously went full-time. And when I went full-time 6 years ago, that was when I stopped playing. And it just went from there. I spent 9 years at the club as a coach, as well as obviously the 12 years as a player. And I loved every minute of it. And coaching has obviously enabled me, hopefully, to have a longer career in football than I would have done as a player, because obviously you can coach for a lot longer, and your impact can be obviously long lasting with players you work with. So no, it's something that I really enjoy. I'm so passionate about.
And just finally, the thing that always gets me whenever I mention the name Ryan Semple, they say, "Oh, the one born in Belfast." So where were you born, Ryan?
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw it the other day on Twitter with obviously Swanee was doing the bit about what local players are up to now, and Adrian Durham got involved as well, and yeah, so I was born in Belfast. So my family have been in the area of Peterborough since the 70s. They're on my dad's side certainly. My granddad moved down here, and as I say, my family have been here for a number of years. I was born in Belfast because my dad got a job basically out there. Was there. My mum went over. I was born. We were there maybe 18 months or so, and then came back to Peterborough. So I've been in Peterborough since I was a toddler. And yeah, and then obviously grew up in Peterborough. So I am from Peterborough, but I am born in Belfast. And then obviously the second Ryan Semple, that's obviously from Northern Ireland as well, just completely kills everyone.